A very good morning. It is now 7 o'clock right here in Nairobi, Kenya. We're coming to you live from our studios on Mombasa Road. Now, it is the last day to mark the end of 2020 as Kenyans prepare to transition into 2021. Morning Express team wishes you a very happy new year and a prosperous 2021. I'm your host, Michael Gitonga, and welcome wherever you are tuning in from. Tweet us and share your feedback via our Twitter handles. That's at KTN News KE, or you can tweet me directly, and that's at Michael G. Gitonga. Let's get this show started with a quick look at our press review, and we start off with the international papers as usual, where we kick off in Tanzania, where Tanzania emerges as main tourist source market for Kenya. Isn't that a surprise, given especially the tiff that we've been having with Tanzania for the longest time ever? Remember, at some point, we had tourists not allowed to land in Kenya and transition to Tanzania and vice versa. So there you go. Tanzania emerges as main tourist source market for Kenya. That's what we have on the Citizen. Let's move on to Uganda, where we have the Daily Monitor. Only certified journalists will cover election, says police boss. And we do know that there's been a lot of trouble in Uganda as they get closer and edge closer and closer to the presidential elections. We do know that Bobi Wine has been arrested several times. I think even as late as yesterday, he was escorted back home. And the excuse has been that he is not observing the COVID-19 protocols given by the Ministry of Health in Uganda. And as a result, there's been quite some bit of unrest. So only certified journalists will cover elections, says police boss. Now, I spoke to a journalist in Uganda, and their fear is that this may be used against them to ensure only those who are pro-government are going to appear for those elections or to cover the elections. Let's wait and see how that's going to pan out. Let's move on to Rwanda, where we have Rwanda today. Pain parents suffer to take care of autistic children. And we do know this has a myriad of issues, given that, one, no parent, of course, is usually emotionally as prepared as they would expect to be with an autistic child. Then you have culture that comes into play, and some cultures would view or deem that as a curse. That, of course, has an issue. So in Rwanda, they are focusing and looking at some of the pain that parents suffer taking care of autistic children. Let's move on to the next paper. The East African. After COVID-19, reviving ruined economies, and this, of course, is going to be a task world over, not just in Kenya or even East Africa, but even in big economies like the States. They are reeling with the effects of COVID-19, and recovering, obviously, is going to be quite a task, a huge task, and we wait and see how that's going to play out. Let's look at the last one, which is Al Jazeera, and Reuters cameraman detained in Ethiopia as he has seen no evidence against him, lawyers say. Now, this is a journalist who was arrested as he was going about his work, and there has been quite a lot of, hullabaloo around that. And Reuters cameraman Kimeria Kimenchu has been held in solitary confinement for nearly a week without a charge or being given any evidence of wrongdoing. That's according to his lawyer. And that's what we have for you on the international scene. But now would like to change focus and look at what do we have making headlines on the last day of 2020 right here in Kenya. Joining me to have that conversation is Youth and Policy Advisor, who is somebody who's not a stranger to your screen. That is Gloria Oroba. Thank you for joining us bright and early. And let me also take this early opportunity to wish you a prosperous, happy 2021.
Good morning, Mike.
All right, thank you. And we go straight to the dailies, and the Standard. We have CS Magoha, yes to lessons under trees. And according to the CS, he says parents should desist from listening to anybody who would make them feel or believe that schools will not be opened as per the given program by the Ministry of Education. So according to him, he says if it means learning under trees, then so be it. But schools must be reopened. Of course, the CS for Education has come under a lot of criticism many times for the strong arm that he has and some of the statements he makes. So, Gloria, do you feel that this is, the way to go? Make or break, schools must open, whether we are ready or not?
You know, I think finally CS Magoha has come around. Remember earlier in the year we were talking about school doesn't really mean a physical building, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be in a classroom for you to learn something. And we actually had conversations around TVET and all this kind of informal education, whereby if you live in a farmhouse and you actually learn stuff about agriculture, that's a form of education. So I feel like as much as we are really we are not so friendly with CS Magoha, particularly the media, I think this time around, actually, when he's talking about, you know, they should learn under the trees, students should, the teachers should feel free on a good day when it's sunny to, you know, ensure they have social distancing by teaching outside. I think he's taken a bit of some time to come around that education does not necessarily mean classrooms and desks. Unfortunately, his delivery is always just off, but I think,
brash.
yeah, it's very, yeah. But I think his point is that, you know, we are privileged enough to be in a geographical region that has good weather most of the time, so we should take advantage of that. Although, when he was talking about now pushing the burden to the parents by saying that now we have to, you know, it just takes 50 shillings or 100 shillings to, you know, buy the mask, and so parents should just, you know, contribute and make sure that their children actually have masks. That's now where I come in and I really try to ask myself, you know, if we can afford to fund a whole referendum, I honestly think that that is where he should have at least tried to push that the national government would at least
to step in and ensure that they facilitate that.
Exactly. I think now those are the places where we should be having conversations. But about learning outside, I believe that education is not necessarily in classrooms. Education is actually on your day-to-day activities, and if sitting outside is also a place where you can get, you know, some sort of informal education, I don't think we should
concentrate on that. Now, question is, we might be forgetting or losing fact of how we got here and what got us there. The issue might not necessarily be whether to learn inside a classroom or outside a class. The issue is also COVID-19. What protocols have been put in place for children and learners? Because one of the things that obviously we would expect with young learners, now that we're having the whole school open, is extracurricular activities. They're going to be playing. How is that going to be handled, given that we have COVID-19 with us and we're even now talking about a new strain? We don't seem to be getting much direction from the Ministry of Education as to what protocols must be put in place to ensure that the learner is safe.
Precisely, and those are the conversations that I was expecting CS Magoha to be, you know, having with us, and actually maybe saying to the stakeholders, if you have any ideas on how we can conduct, you know, drama or co-curricular activities, or all, you know, like the lower primary students, those are not students you can keep seated for an hour without breaks and this and that. And even just the lunch protocol, how do you go to queue to get, you know, your uji or whatever? Those are the conversations that we should be having. And I think, and I sincerely think that that is where the ministry has failed. And if they have those protocols, I think they have also failed to maybe disseminate that information to parents, because as much as they are working with teachers and the teachers are being trained on how to handle the students as we open, parents also need to be aware that if I'm sending my son to school, that there's going to be a period of 10 minutes maybe where perhaps he's going to be sitting in a corner, you know, away from everyone else. We need to also, to manage our expectations, we need to be informed what are the plans that these schools have.
Right.
But I think, in all fairness, I think, first of all, I highly doubt that we have that kind of capacity in terms of technical expertise within our Ministry of Education. And I strongly believe that the collaboration efforts that they should have had with other ministries or stakeholders has been very minimum, because we've seen that Magoha has actually proven to be a leader that cannot really, you know, work with other stakeholders. And that's the real problem. So now a lot of people have probably said, you know what, if he thinks he can run with this show, let him run. Let's see what he can do. And I think that's what he's suffering.
All right, and maybe just very briefly before we move away from matters education, on the Daily Nation, it has captured this on school fees tussle as Magoha warns on an increase. Of course, one of the areas that many parents are a little bit concerned about is the area of school fees, as to how much is going to be charged and how this is going to be done. But according to the Ministry of Education, if anything, if the CS's statement is anything to go by, is that they should brace themselves for an increase. fees, which again leaves parents wondering, where does government come in? Because this has been a very tough year for everyone. Would expect that at least they would subsidize or at least cushion so that students are able to go back without necessarily burdening the parents.
Absolutely. And you know, personally, Mike, I've been looking at newsletters coming from my son's school and whatnot. And fortunately, a lot of parents have actually realized that this conventional school system is actually not, you know, necessary. So I think even as you threaten parents, whether it is governmental school or private schools, parents have actually realized we have an option. I'll keep my child at home and I'll find a way to educate them, you know, with alternative education. So the first thing I think is, as our Ministry of Education is pushing to have that business continuity to push, you know, because there are businesses that are being anchored against our school system, yeah?
Right.
So you'll find that there are people who are supplying food, there are people who are supplying uniforms. You've seen parents going to buy uniforms because apparently their kids have gained so much weight by staying indoors. There are those businesses that are being sustained by the school, and of course, you'll find certain synergies where the schools are actually pushing for certain things, including that increment in the school fees, or adding additional things such as, you know, now we have to buy sanitizer, so we are going to distribute this cost to so and so. At the end of the day, I think we have to come to a realization where, as much as you push these parents to pay more school fees or to dig somewhere and get, I think parents have realized that this form of education is absolutely not necessary.
Right.
And so they have actually, I've seen a lot of communities coming together and having like small homeschooling sessions and, you know, registering their kids into the international examinations, because that is also another option. So people have evolved and they've actually found innovative ways. There are students who actually graduated from IT or this ICT kind of courses who have been tutoring our kids online.
Right.
And so suddenly there are other forms of education that we can actually access. And I believe if our Ministry of Education does not necessarily see that there is competition outside of the, you know,
the structures
convention
that
or the structures that
right.
they've had,
yeah.
They're going to end up with empty classrooms, they're going to end up with empty institutions, and people will simply move on, because we are now in an innovative era where if you can't afford a certain thing, you start looking elsewhere. How am I going to now get my child to learn computers because I can't afford that computer in class? Or, you know, so I think this whole idea of even pushing that burden on parents who've lost their jobs, parents who've actually been suffering this, the effects of this pandemic, it's not going to work.
All right, and definitely one thing COVID-19 has taught us is that we must be extremely innovative, and the education sector will not be left out of that. We must look forward. Let's look at other stories on the headlines. And one, of course, that is going to be a landmark for 2020 is Nairobi County, where we do not have a governor who's been impeached, Mike Mbuvi Sonko. Now, we have it on the Standard with caption, "Big names missing in the IEBC list for City Post race. ODM missing as 20 aspirants submit names for Nairobi race." On the Daily Nation, it is captured under the headline, "No second chance for impeached governors." Let's start off with that second chance for, you know, impeached governors. According to IEBC and EACC, they say that there's going to be no chance for those who've been impeached. We've seen Babayao, a.k.a. Ferdinand Waitito, you know, declaring his interest in the Nairobi gubernatorial seat, despite the fact that he was impeached from Kiambu just this year. So your thoughts, first of all, on that directive, that there's going to be no chance for impeached governors to go for a second chance?
You know, I think we tend to forget that Chebukati is not the law. We tend to forget that IEBC is not the law. We have a law. We have laws that we follow. We have a constitution that clearly has mitigated all the risks that, you know, we could be facing when it comes to a situation like this. People have been quoting some articles saying that, you know, once you've been impeached, because you've been impeached in these 4 counts, and then therefore there are certain chapters that you now no longer fulfill, and so there you're illegible. But if you read, there's an article actually there that says that a person is not disqualified under Clause 2 unless all possibility of appeal or review of the relevant sentence or decision has been exhausted. So Every other time when I hear our legal experts quoting and saying, you know, they've been impeached on criminal offenses, on this and that, and so therefore they cannot, you know, meet the threshold of integrity and Chapter 6 and this and that, they're forgetting that impeachment was done. They have not, actually Sonko is still in court trying to exhaust his rights of an appeal. And so we must be able to understand that even if Chebukati wakes up today and says these people cannot buy, Chebukati is not the law. And then there's a thing I wanted to talk about before you threw me into the impeachment is, Mike, I actually believe that the drivers of impeaching Sonko, the drivers of the initiative of this impeachment, they never really anticipated a situation where we would go into a by-election. I actually believe the way it was set up was that by the time we were asking Sonko to transfer some of the dockets to national government, the idea was then to bully him out by introducing that NMS, which is what they did, and to an extent where now we were pushing for the Building Bridges initiative so that we could actually, remember there was a conversation about dissolving Nairobi County as a county. So they had not anticipated that we would go into a by-election, because the plan was that by the time we are here, we could have already dissolved Nairobi County, and NMS therefore would just, you know, take up that business continuity of Nairobi County. Now, of course, what happened is that Sonko fought. First of all, BBI was rejected, and they could not, you know, push that and fast forward it into actualizing that Nairobi is not a county. So now we are in a situation where even the initiators of this whole process of turning Nairobi into this metropolitan kind of, you know, organ, they didn't have an end-to-end process. So now we are at a place where we have a by-election. Nobody really thought through, and that is the reason why when you look at the different parties, including Jubilee, they have been unable to front a strong candidate for the by-election of the Nairobi County.
Although they would argue that as far as they're concerned, they do have, you know, a strong candidate like former Dagoretti South Member of Parliament, Dennis Waweru, and that remains to be seen. And also, well, I think it was clear that would definitely get to a by-election if Sonko was impeached by virtue of the fact that there was no deputy and there was no time for him to do that, which seems again to have been an orchestration of Sonko himself to ensure that he stays in office, but it didn't work.
So Sonko failed, first of all. He should have had a deputy all this time. He failed. There we have to see. He failed in terms of having, you know, thinking that he is smart enough not to have a deputy, so therefore no one is going to, you know.
So he'll have to stay there until...
But as I said, this was not, they were not anticipating a by-election. That is the reason why earlier in the year, BBI was really being pushed, that we have to have the referendum, we have to push it. They tried to take it through Parliament so that we can, you know, amend the Constitution very quickly, dissolve Nairobi, and all those... they failed. Do you understand? They tried to take it to Parliament. They didn't. It looked like they didn't have the numbers, because before that we had the CRA issues, and they realized that even if you have the numbers in terms of the handshake, people might actually go and form other, you know, coalitions for their own. Yeah. Right. So at the end of the day, I actually believe that they did not anticipate for a situation where they'd have a by-election, because if they did, then we would have already, first of all, introduced a bill in Parliament that would actually deal with the issue of viability of a candidate in terms of one that has already been impeached. So right now, as it is, you can see everybody panicking. You can see after the political parties approved Waititu to run as an independent, the next question that everyone was asking is, so is he legible? So has IEBC actually cleared him? Because of course, we know very well that impeachment is it's a legal process, but it is a political...
Heavily political.
It's a heavily political process.
Absolutely.
And you can remember the Senate, when they were impeaching Governor Sonko, they kept on reiterating, this is not a court of law. We definitely don't have to prove and substantiate and give hard evidence. All we have to do is persuade the House that there is cause or there's reason for us to say...
For a vote of no confidence.
Yes.
We have no confidence that you can
so
no longer
now,
be
based
governor.
on that, and we argue this with a lot of lawyers, based on that, then can you say that Sonko actually was found guilty beyond reasonable doubt, and there was evidence that was tabled, and that he actually carried out criminal offenses, that he actually breached the Constitution? You cannot say that. So how then do you come back and say, through IEBC or any other legal entity, to say that actually this person is guilty beyond reasonable doubt, this is the evidence that was presented, this is what that we pushed, and so therefore they're not eligible to vote. You can't
All right.
say that. So
And
it's
I guess,
an issue of
yeah.
it's an issue of a legal process. Impeachment is legal, but it is being run through the Senate, which is a political organ. And at the end of the day, they do not have, they don't carry the same due diligence that our judicial system carries. They don't, in fact, the bill that we should be pushing for is that we have to amend our impeachment law to the point that if we're going through an impeachment process, then we definitely have to have the same stringent measures that we take in court, because this is actually going to end up into a criminal...
It has a ripple effect on the career and also that particular position. And I'm sure Nairobi County is something that we can, you know, discuss until the cows come home. Because of time, I'll request that we possibly look at something different. And for you, Gloria, maybe in terms of what you feel Nairobi needs, what kind of a leader are we looking for? Away from the politics, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of politics. We'll have all manner of candidates fronted. I mean, right now I've seen we have 15 independent candidates. We have ODM who've not fronted theirs. But away from that, what does Nairobi need for us to function?
You know, it's not only Nairobi, but I believe all counties should be treated equally. I actually do not subscribe to this ideology that Nairobi is special and it is this and that. All counties, and that's why devolution was brought in, all counties should be treated as though they are actually the backbone of the economy of this country. And having said that, I believe that Nairobi needs, first of all, a person who has run a business or who has actually run an organization. I say that because, one, you look at the money that is needed to run this county, yeah? It's to the billions. You look at the resources that are being handled on this county. We need someone who understands that in order for you to run a profitable and effective business, these are the measures that you need to put in place. So therefore, when I look at the candidates that are being fronted, the first thing I ask myself is, do they have the experience of understanding that the responsibility of running this business that is called Nairobi actually requires that you have some financial capability of understanding how to balance books, of understanding how to pull in resources, of understanding how to fundraise? That's one thing. And then, do they also understand that at the end of the day, when you're mismanaging those funds or when you're mismanaging those resources, be it the money or the human resources or whatever, the actual effect is that you are killing the residents of Nairobi, because it boils down to that. So when I look at those candidates that are being fronted, I'm not looking at what most political parties are now doing, ensuring that we have gender balance by fronting all their candidates as women. You understand? Because you can be a woman, but you can be a woman who doesn't know how to run a business or how to sustain an organization in terms of having the duty of care and understanding the responsibilities that are put on you. So those are the things that I'm looking at. So when I look at those candidates, I see that some of them are strong, but now the question is, outside of running and operating a business, it's also a very, very toxic and political space. So can you handle that? But then, Mike, let me remind you that we can sit here and talk about what we think Nairobi needs, but at the end of the day, the sovereignty remains with the people. And that's why I still support Governor Sonko, because he got over 800,000 votes. And I still think that if he ends up in that ballot, believe it or not, he's going to be voted back in.
All right, and food for thought for all of us, whether democracy really works when the masses, you know, do that, because the masses gave us the likes of Sonko and Waitito, and look at where we are today. There are others who may argue that this needs to be done in a boardroom, and in a boardroom, or rather in terms of when we have the masses deciding who are going to be the leaders, what qualities are they looking for? What qualities are they looking for in terms of having those leaders? So that's an argument that can continue for a while, and maybe we'll tackle it next year. But let's look at something different. And on page 6 of the Standard, we have an article there. They made a notable mark this year. You have the likes of Chief Justice David Maraga, you have the President, the former Prime Minister, and the Deputy President definitely making headlines this year. And maybe from you, Gloria, what are some of those areas, or who is it that maybe, and maybe they may not be featured here, feel free to let us know who it is that possibly made a mark for you in 2020.
You know, I was reading this article and I thought it's very unfortunate that when we think of the youth, we think of artists. When we think of the youth, we think of
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Musicians, comedians, there's nothing wrong.
I wouldn't find anything wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that, but believe you me, there's so many other youthful people who have made a mark.
For example?
For me particularly, the people that for me was, I would say, there are many, but the one that I would want to talk about today is the students who actually came out, who innovated, who created the ventilators at Kenyatta University. You know, speaking of a year where since March we've been dealing with the pandemic, we've been trying to resolve issues in terms of how to ensure that our families are safe, in terms of how to, you know, give more resources to our hospitals. I believe that is those are people who should have made it to page. Yeah, they should have made it to page 6.
Right.
6.
Right.
Because they did not only, they were very swift on coming with a solution to deal with the issue of not having ventilators that were locally made, and they're still trying to keep the cost. But those are the stories that I would have appreciated. Not to say that Elsa Majimbo has not done much or should not be recognized. I just feel that this assumption of this, it's almost like a de facto that when you think of youth.
Maybe the way in which this is done is what gives us those results. Remember the time where we had the likes of Githeriman having presidential awards? Well, we had people like athletes who were not recognized. So maybe the question might be, how do we even come up with some of those notable events in terms of highlighting them? Yeah. And maybe we need to work on that, because as a country, we certainly seem to go for what is more popular in terms of numbers of what people have been talking about, and comedy and artists, of course, would come up.
Yeah, well, I also think that we need a cultural mind shift in terms of how we perceive our youth. Our youth are actually doing big things in different spaces, in the medical space, in the political. I mean, just think about the political space. I would not have, for instance, if there was a person like Alex Matere who made it there, for me, as much as we are not in the same political divide, I would be like, yes, I mean, we are finally starting to recognize that youth are not only in the creative spaces, they are also in the political spaces, they're in the medical spaces, educational spaces, we talk about the security spaces. So it's almost a de facto that when you want to pick a youth and highlight them, they have to come from that space. So.
All right. And we have just another minute or so to wind up. So I want to give you this opportunity, maybe just to give us your closing remarks, but and particularly politically speaking, what we are looking to in 2021. I can see here on page 13 of the Standard, verification of BBI signatures begins, and that seems to be what maybe is going to be set off in terms of politics in Kenya for 2021. Your closing remarks, and maybe an opportunity just to wish the country and all and sundry a prosperous new year. Gloria.
Mike, I want to say that it's been a very, very long year. A lot of people, unfortunately, have had the shorter end of the stick. They have lost loved ones. They have, you know, had to deal with the effects of the pandemic. You know, we are also for us as well, we've had to deal with that. But I want to look at it from a positive perspective. This is the year that, as a country, we actually started, or we pushed our manufacturing locally to heights that we could not believe in, because we could not import, we could not export when the borders were shut down. This is the year that we suddenly realized we had to fix certain things in our country, hence the Building Bridges initiative. But this is also the year that the youth have been very active in terms of being in those policy and governance spaces and ensuring that, you know, we are not just being given things to execute. So for me, personally, I thank God for this far we have come. I thank God for actually making us, you know, we are resilient, for actually ensuring that we don't give up, you know, Mike, that we didn't reach August, September and think, okay, you know what, might as well shut down and just, you know, pray and hope that something happens. We've actually been getting out of bed, going out there, hustling, you know, trying this, trying that, and I think 2020 has been a very dynamic year, but at the end of the day, we have learned lessons which we are taking into 2021. We have learned to be resilient. We have actually learned that there can be life after the pandemic. And so to all the viewers and to everyone at Standard Group, I want to say that it's actually been a year of hope. It's actually been a year that has been positive, if you think of it that way. So going into 2021, as usual, I'll say this, I push the youth to go out there, to represent their ideologies, to speak up, even if your voice is not being heard. That little thing that you're doing in your little space is actually impactful to some extent. So don't give up and keep pushing on. And